So I just want to show a couple of quick slides. So I just wanted to show a few pictures. Lisa reminded me of this element of our report of the existing conditions or the prior conditions when we started the needs assessment at the Braun Research Library up at the Southwest Museum. You'll see a variety of formats and storage, and you'll see so many things: vertical, horizontal, cabinetry, unhoused items, partially housed collections, old non-archival boxes of various acidity, rolls, maps, who knows, and inconsistent labeling. So this is sort of where we started and had to figure out how do we, overwhelming and monstrous to think of, but as Lisa said, chipping away bit by bit. Here's another one. Large format things, things stacked up in a corner. I think there's our old school maps, which I love, those roll-up ones. I just love seeing what people thought was important to study in class, and how our interpretations of space and other spatial interpretation changed over time. Oh, and this is one of my favorites. So we have like playback media, playback devices for various media. Super important, not only as interesting objects in themselves, but for sharing digital or pre-digital media, including the wax cylinders, a huge collection of wax cylinders, which I was terrified of opening a box and touching, but Lisa seemed to be okay with it. Okay, so we'll show a few photos of what it looked like after rehousing, but before move in a little bit later in our discussion. So jumping into our session outline, we have a number of topics we're going to move through. We tried to make it in logical order, but I think a lot of these things touch different areas of our work to more or less importance depending on the type of project. If it's just a rehousing, you might want to spend more time in one area. If you're planning a move, if you're doing new construction versus renovation, I think we have both scenarios here potentially. So it starts with estimating storage, assessing your collections condition and what kinds of risks that you might be facing in the process. Disaster planning, always something that needs to be in the foreground, too often in the background. Rehousing those materials, storage and housing, and how it relates to all kinds of areas of work. Planning those spaces, getting them from the conceptual plan through the construction documents and what your role is in that. Getting the collections moved once you have a space. Building projects, maybe a little bit out of order here, but a little more nitty gritty in the process of building and planning. And then of course, as Denise mentioned, being seen and heard and in the room, and your advocacy leading the discussion. And then we have a few exercises. Okay, so estimating storage needs. Gosh, methods of counting and measuring. Really depends on what you're measuring. Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Will it be, if it's vertical now, will it be vertical later? Is it rolls, or, maybe something that's tightly rolled now needs to be much looser later if we're looking at what will be happening over to that collection over the longevity of however much time, I say however much time is left for that collection item. Hopefully it's measured in centuries and millennia, but that's only if we do the right thing when we have those opportunities. So, just talking about some of the things that, how I approach things is try to get rough estimates for planning and budgeting purposes, very early. If you're looking at a collection that takes up X amount of square feet, but it's completely inadequate, I think often the assumption is the people who are holding the financial strings is that it will take up X amount of space later. Almost never going to be the case. And there's a rough estimation that needs to be made. Like, well, it's inadequate now. The reason why we're moving it, the reason why we are doing something here is because we have to do it differently and we have to do it better. So it's going to be X times 2, X times 1.5, X times 5, whatever that happens to be. But there's no easy formula. There's no way to say, okay, I have this many books. It's going to go, well, books might be the only example where it's a pretty straight line discussion. But once you get into the weird and wonderful and strange kind of shaped things, and all those assumptions are out the window. And one thing I really wanted to emphasize here is, depending on your archive, depending on what you're working on, you might have a big chunk of it that's really easy to work with. That's your books, and you're just as for lack of a better example right now, that, okay, some of them are going to be rehoused, you're going to get Mylar, they're going to be have custom enclosures of some kind, fairly easy to estimate those. That's not where you're spending your time and your efforts and your expertise. You're really looking at, everyone uses the 80-20 rule, that 20%, whether it's 5% or 10% or 30%, but probably a smaller portion that is really going to define success for a project. And the thing that you'll really be proud of and kind of returning to over and over again. The books were great, everything got moved, but how did the maps go? How did the wax cylinders go? How did the large format objects, the weird, wonderful things that people know and recognize your collection, and that where you already probably spend a lot of your time and energy. So we'd love to hear in a little bit what those weird, peculiar challenges are for you, and maybe we can spend a little bit more time talking about some specific examples.
Yeah, and I've got a little case study here to talk about what this kind of plays out like in action. So this is some of the documentation from a collection I worked on as a freelancer. This was an inventory assessment and strategic planning project for an artist's collection. At the time, and this is a Southern California artist named Jay McCafferty, who sadly passed away 2 years ago. At the time that I started working with him and his wife and his collection, he was in the end stages of terminal cancer. So we had a narrow window of opportunity to ask important questions and also, work directly with the creator of the materials to resolve questions about, like which way up does this abstract piece of art go? And so the situation was he had 40 years worth of work as a working artist. Much of it stored in his home and studio, based in the San Pedro area, and a lot of it was just rolled up and put into a cabinet. He would work on a piece until it was finished, roll it up, put it away, and then work on the next piece. So there were two major storage areas, his studio, and then there was an outbuilding where a lot of the framed and mounted works were. There was also a flat file. You can see that in the left-hand image. And that had, lots of artwork that was not framed or mounted. It also had things like dog carriers that had artwork piled up in it and old furniture. So there was a big mix, and understandably, Jay and his wife, Ellen, were a little overwhelmed at the prospect of trying to just sort out and make sense of the material. They really couldn't even tell me how much material was there, because as John Cage very famously once said, you can't create and analyze at the same time. They're two different processes. So Jay's role in this was to make work and put it aside. And my role as an archivist was to come in and just make sense of it all and give them some point of reference and some way to kind of feel less overwhelmed by what they had, so that they could make longer term decisions about what they were going to do with this collection. First they had to know what was even there. So as you can see from the right-hand image, a lot of these materials were rolled up very tightly and stored in these cardboard tubes, big concrete pouring forms that are used on construction sites. So Jay was already doing quite a lot of inventive handling of his own work. He also, fortunately, used really high quality materials. So although the cardboard isn't ideal because it's acidic and is not great, and rolling things up very tightly and stacking them onto one another isn't ideal either. The fact is, it was all stored in a room temperature, domestic environment. So the temperature was relatively stable. There were no leaks or major, hazards related to climate control. And there was no immediate evidence of pest infestation. So just as a first pass, my first, my starting stage was to just go in and do what I learned from working with crime scene investigators, which is start at the left-hand side of the room and just make a clockwise pass, left to right, top to bottom, just taking pictures of everything where it is as it is. So starting with some documentation that you can sit with after the fact and just sort of look through, and then maybe count the things on the shelves. You don't have to do it all in the moment. So that's my first takeaway from this. You don't have to do it all that moment, but it is good to get a high level overview. Then the next step was to take a first pass at the collection and just a very high level overview of what we were working with. The big question is, how much art is there? And that's really hard to tell when everything's wrapped up together. In those clusters of rolled up material, looking at it from the outside, you don't know if there's one piece or 20 pieces rolled up in that one roll, and then 20 more rolls. So I wanted to get a sense of just how much stuff there was. Same thing with a drawer full of art, or an open bin that has pieces stacked up in it. Just getting a rough count of everything, and in the process, getting a sense of small, medium, large, and special needs materials or objects was my intention in this first pass. And I wanted to take just a couple. I sort of set a deadline of just a couple of days on site, taking every single roll out, unrolling it, quick count, look what's there, roll it back up, put it there, put it back. Now, that sometimes goes against our primary instincts, right? We think, oh, well, for handling everything, we might as well just catalog everything while we have it, do everything at the item level. Now, this is where the archivist in me says, no, item level is not the way to go. And Shelley, great question. Recommendations for database building. I'm going to show you the first pass, and then I can show you the second pass, the sort of final version of this. That's a great question. So the first pass was just to get a rough sense of what was in the collection, and you can see Melanie, one of my crew folks here. This was a case where working in pairs was really, really useful, so that one person could be on the computer and one person could be, pulling these often very large rolls of paper out, unrolling them. Having 4 hands rather than 2 hands made the work go a lot faster. It was definitely not something I could have done on my own. So that's another thing to think about as you are doing, if you're doing an inventory or just getting that basic handle on a collection that needs housing, or just sort of, you just need to grok it. Do it with somebody else, so that you have another pair of eyes looking for things. Somebody can be taking notes, and the other person can be counting, going down the shelf. So shelf A, we've got 78 books. Shelf, great, 78 books, shelf A. Any weird ones? No, everything's in good condition. So making those notes and putting those things together. And so as you can see, just from that initial pass, we immediately were able to get a sense of how big is big, how small is small. We got a sense of the entire scope of the collection, not just a piece here and a piece there, but we got a sense of sort of the bell curve, where most of the stuff was, what most of it was made of. In this case, Jay's very unique and beautiful mark making technique was solar burning. So he would use a magnifying glass and the light of the sun to burn marks on paper. So on the left-hand side, you can see a beautiful, very minimalist expression of that. That's just these sort of smoky marks in a big ring on a white ground. You can see what the effect of being rolled up and stored very tightly for many months is. It's, there's some creases, there's some wrinkles on the edge there. It's like, it's got a little attitude. It's rolled up so tightly it doesn't want to uncurl. But in general, in very good condition. On the right-hand side, that's a very small piece. That's actually printer paper. We could tell because you could tell it was the scrap paper, because there were some there were the extra sheets that get printed out that have like a little one line at the bottom, the footer that gets printed out. And so Jay was reusing just office quality printer paper. It's 6 or 7 layers of very, very delicate, very intricate, and like tangled up, and watercolor pigment. So this was a more fragile, delicate piece. So right from the start, just opening up drawers and boxes and rolls and just counting what was there, and being able to say, in this roll we had 17 pieces, 2 large, 6 small, and 9, I don't know if that was the right math, but 9 medium. And so we set a knowing as I do how big the biggest archival boxes are, and how big the flat file shelves are, we use those as our limits. We're thinking already about what is the best practice for this. Obviously, for flat material, putting it in a nice acid-free box is a great way to go. It's reasonably inexpensive, especially if you can put a lot of things in one box. It is, in the case of the flat file material, we wanted to take maximal advantage of the existing storage space in the home, because we didn't know when or whether this collection would be moving in the near future. So we were working within the constraints of the space that we had. And for the large pieces, we knew that rolling was probably going to be the way to go, because some of these pieces were as large as 9 feet square. So there's just no practical way, even for many museums, to store works of that size like completely unfurled. So if you think about other kinds of material like large carpets, big pieces of textiles, decorative arts collections often have things like curtains or yardage of lace, things like that are very delicate and need to be handled very carefully. That high level overview gave us a sense of, be an ability to chunk the collection up and say, we have this many small pieces, this many medium pieces, this many large pieces, and just kind of highlight, oh, here are the special needs we might encounter. Some of the pieces were like just 6 foot by 6 foot single solid sheets that were completely burned all over, so that they were like bridal lace. They were so fragile and so delicate. Figuring out how we would want to handle those and make a good decision that would be supportive, and would minimize the potential for damage if they were housed either long-term or short-term, and accessed regularly. Andrew, can you go to the next slide for me, please?
Yeah, let me just say, this is really amazing work. I'm really enjoying looking at this, and I didn't realize those were burn marks. I thought that was like a deconstructed feather boa arranged in a ring there. It's just,
no, isn't it beautiful?
yeah.
And that's another positive of this this process for me as somebody who is new to the collection and new to Jay's work. I first met him when I had a meeting to talk with them about what they might need. And, I had looked at his website and I'd seen his work, and the work that's posted on his website is fairly homogeneous. It's all from one series, where the blue series, where it's, he used these really intense and beautiful pigments, and did sort of applied them when in liquid form, and then burned in sort of patterns that are very clearly influenced by his lifetime of living near the water, and he was a lifeguard in San Pedro, and lifelong triathlete, runner, lifeguard, and lover of the water. So it got me an immediate sense of familiarity with his work, and a sense of the beauty and the variety that he achieved with a very constrained set of materials and what's the word, and techniques. So basically, I got a sense from just looking at this that although he did work with a range of substrates, so he worked with cardboard, masonite, canvas, different kinds of paper, collage, and early in his career, he did a lot of photography, and he also was the chair of the art department at Harbor College, and so he taught ceramics there. So he also worked in three-dimensional material, and he's actually probably best known for his video and multimedia works, which were part of the Long Beach Museum of Art collection and are now at the Getty Research Institute. So he's known for a few key video works that he developed starting in the 1970s. He was a really, really prolific artist, but these solar burn paintings are just stunning, and I think that they're underseen, and it, getting to see the whole scope of the collection gave me a lot of excitement about, yes, this is a legacy that deserves preservation, and I want to make sure that it is well cared for. It gave me a lot of excitement about just like great opportunities and creative problems to solve, and it was honestly like Christmas morning every day working on this collection, like unrolling a new roll, and just like me and my crew were just like oohing and awing every day about like, this is my favorite, oh no, this is my new favorite, like this is my number one, but like this is my favorite for today, but this is like this like if I could take any piece home, like this would be the one, like it's still not my favorite, but this is my favorite for today. So yeah, just seeing that variety, and it gave me a sense too of the privilege that we all have when we get to work with these materials. We get to see and interact with our materials in a way that nobody else does. And so Denise was talking earlier about the sense of expertise and being, out of your element when it comes to, helping to plan a building project. But when you are an archivist, often you are the one person that has seen every single document in somebody's personal papers. When you've processed a collection, you really know it on a level that I think gives you an emotional connection to it and a familiarity with it that very few other people get to have. So yeah, next slide.
Yeah, I feel that too. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that work. I want to learn more now. But I get that sense too. Like my skills and my experience can translate to, I could build office buildings and plan space for, people in tech or manufacturing or whatever. But it's really the connection to the archives, to the collections of various sorts, and really doing what needs to be done for providing and sustaining those collections and access for the future. That really drives me. My background, my experience on its face might seem a little dry at times, but it's really what it serves to do for collections of various scale and prominence is really what I value. in my work. So.
If I may
Next slide.
To one of the things, especially in my work as the LA subject coordinator, seeing people in various states of, I called it various states of undress in regards to what state their archives are in. And peculiar enough, those that are most embarrassed, I see that as a key to, you're probably one of the most organized because I don't know why that is, but that is. But one of the things that I see that needs to be done early on, whether you're moving or not, is to just label your location, like number your shelves, like this is shelf number 1. This is, you don't need math or anything like that. Just, it's so important because a lot of people will not want to move anything. They're lose track of stuff because they're like, well, if I move it from that shelf, then I don't know where it goes. But if you, for whatever magical reason, if you label your location, it's like, oh yeah, I moved it from shelf number 3. So I would say that is like also the number 1 thing to try to get accomplished if you can. Do you have a before?
That's such a beautiful segue, Lisa, to my next slide here, which is the basic spreadsheet that I put together in Excel. Now, I always say that the most valuable things that you can bring to an inventory project are a piece of paper and a pencil. You know, Andrew, your recommendation that Lisa echoed earlier to just write down all your questions. I just had a working document, like just a blank Word document on my computer. You know, my laptop was my friend. Tablet computers are super helpful for this process as well. Just being able to have something that you can hold in your hand or move around on a little cart while you're in a storage area is incredibly helpful. And so, yeah, you really don't need any special equipment. You don't need any fancy software. And so I did exactly what Lisa was talking about here, where I just, again, left to right, top to bottom, you know, like clockwise from where you enter the room, like left wall. And I'm terrible with ordinal directions. So, but thankfully, the house faced the water, so I knew which direction south was, and I could say west wall, east wall, you know, window wall, or you know, staircase. And so for the just the very basic spreadsheet that I created to track this information, I use like really basic functions in Excel, like you can see at the tops of columns F, G, and H, and I, a running total of how many pieces we had inventoried. Really basic stuff, right? But I also have, like, you know, the location and the sublocation. So which building, which room, which sublocation within that room. There was a big table in the studio. There was a closet in the studio. And then there was sort of a main working area. And then upstairs, there was a studio loft. That's where the closet with the, you know, rolled up materials were. And this is where I just jotted down all of the notes. So if any of the materials were framed, if there were, you know, like the, you know, table, lower shelf, and I just added columns as needed to kind of, to build that out. So in the closet, we had, you know, like tube number 1, roll number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so that way, and I just took a piece of artist tape, and as we unrolled and rolled things back up, you know, we just emptied out 1 tube at a time, put all those rolls on the floor, rolled, you know, fortunately there was enough space to work. So that's also crucial. Having enough space to kind of like unpack everything and pack it back together again was really critical for this project. If you don't have that, try to get it, because it can really help to just sort of like get everything out. And even that action, just sort of shaking the dust off of things, is a step forward for a collection that you are trying to manage. A lot of materials do better when they get aired out a little bit. So the you know, individual rolls, you know, when we rolled them back up, we rolled them up really loosely, so that we were already kind of like trying to relax the artworks inside. And then we just put a piece of artist tape on it, that, you know, to hold it closed, and that, you know, just had the roll number on it. we were doing those things as temporary actions. Normally we wouldn't put tape on things because, you know, tape isn't great. Like we hate tape in collections, but for things like this, there was a lot of stuff we were doing that was just temporary. And, you know, it could be temporary for a couple of months, temporary for, you know, just a day or two. But getting comfortable with the idea, you know, as archivists, that sometimes what we're doing for the short term in order to move towards a long term, doing things in stages, again, rather than all at once. So yeah, spreadsheets are absolutely your friend. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be a full-on database, but Shelley, you asked what are recommendations for database building as we go through inventory. From my experience, I would say start with the basics, and then be prepared to add stuff. And maybe 40 lines in, you realize like, oh, you know what, I should be keeping track of this little feature or this bit of information as well. I'm going to add a notes field for that. So, you know, have a highlighted row maybe that says like, oh, from this point on, like I started keeping notes. We don't have data for these. So be iterative in your process and understand that it's okay to advance and be applying things from like this point forward, and know how that affects the conclusions that you're drawing from the data that you're collecting.
It also helps, you know, having a spreadsheet or, you know, basically a flat database it is a great way to help you to think about collections and challenges, things that, you know, like characteristics that you might not have thought about looking at a single object, but once you start listing and adding, like, oh, what about something about the peculiarity of the medium or peculiarity of the way that's currently stored versus ideas for like what are our potential options for the future in terms of treatment and housing and moving and new storage location access, you know, all sorts of different sub categories that might emerge. Now, I you know, in the last
you said it earlier, years, like, is it vertical now, but it's going to be horizontal later? That's a great question.
Right. So, you know, while I completely agree with using a really simple tool that we all have, whether it's Google Sheets or Excel, I've moved away from the Microsoft environment because I don't really, you know, I'm paying for Google anyway. So, but, you know, it's all the same. It's all interchangeable for this kind of function. Now, soon after that, you know, when I'm looking at this Snowden, immediately I'm thinking about dry design, right? So do not repeat yourself. So if you so in terms of later on being able to group and filter, that you have the wherewithal to do that you don't have two versions of the same category or the same subcategory. So if you're talking about,
hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is like my most important issue currently. My colleagues have started basic databases using Excel. It really and there are programs that have been created, you know, that can become quite expensive. But for example, in my case, work is internationally published. It has been utilized. It may have been exhibited, and it's very important to be able to go to search your database in a number of different ways. And I'm trying not to be redundant and having to look at things over and over, or as you just mentioned, you know, repeating various listings. So I'm really looking for help actually in how to use a database so that will enable you to link, cross-reference, and do all kinds of other things. Was that clear? Was my question clear?
Yeah. And Snowden, I see your comment, and this whole seminar is about to become an advertising session for Airtable.
We love it. It's like Texas Pete hot sauce. I put that shit on everything. I love Airtable.
My God, my life is our lives are changed. I'm sure I'm going to speak for Snowden, and we use it for everything, from organizing our, you know, which restaurant I'm going to go to on my next vacation, to figuring out how to prioritize home and to organizing archival projects of every sort, to organizing exhibitions and taking those archives and moving it into an exhibition format and repackaging data, filtering, sorting, presenting, communicating. but lest this, everyone become overwhelmed who's not familiar with Airtable. It's as easy as starting with Google Sheets if you already know Excel. It's such a seamless transition and really unlocks potential you never could have imagined without it. So happy to present examples, show you what my Airtable homepage looks like. I don't know if you want to show anything particular.
Yeah, actually, Denise, did you have a question?
No, actually, I definitely would love to see or to participate in a class on Airtable. I've never heard of it.
It's amazing.
But is
just search YouTube.
Is it user easy? Because
it's so friendly. It's so friendly. Yeah, it's just
okay, Snowden.
It's what you always wished Excel would be, and isn't, and like it understands what dates are. Like it's so great. In fact, Andrew, if you want to stop sharing, I can just jump right over to the database that was sort of the next phase of this. When we did get into the next phase of this project was item level inventory and documentation, and exactly the things that you were talking about, Shelley, with exhibition history, publications, individuals and actors, like people who have bought and sold his work over time, being able to group things and tag things by series. We wanted to have a lot of capability for this collection, and because the artist and his wife hadn't fully decided, what they were going to do in the long-term future with this collection, we wanted to kind of plan for every contingency. So this is hang on one second, let me share this screen here. This is what we came up with that would enable us to track all of the information that was useful to track, including things like condition information. So you can see, everybody thumbs up if you can see my screen. Participants, it says, okay, great. So so we have tabs right here, and as Taryn very helpfully mentioned, this is a very, very easy way to create a relational database. So Andrew used the phrase a flat file like Excel, and it is just rows and columns, right? You just have one row, one row is an object, one column is, the field, so name, author, title, date, etc. A relational database is three-dimensional. So each item in one table can link to another item in another table. And that's how most collections management systems work. And that's what applications like Access or FileMaker can do. They are relational databases. And this is a relational database that you can make yourself very, very easily. So for any of the 2D works in this collection, or the 3D works and time-based media that are also inventoried as part of this collection, we didn't have a lot. Sketchbooks we inventoried separately, with their own tab, and documented separately. So we're tracking different information for each big category of objects. There were several dozen sketchbooks in Jay's collection. So we established a different workflow for documenting those because they were very different in character from the rest of his work, but really his sketchbooks and journals really contribute a lot of useful information to what we might understand about his body of work as a whole. So what we tracked for the sketchbooks were the dimensions. We took a picture of the front and the back cover and the interior pages. And with Airtable, you can attach documents and images to any row of your table, which is just such a great feature to be able to use. So here we've got the interior page, the exterior page. So the first page with anything written on it, and the last dated page if there wasn't any other identifying information, so that we could get a date range for when he used his sketchbooks. Much like with his artwork, Jay would, start with a sketchbook and just use that. There weren't a lot of overlapping dates in the sketchbooks. And so, they really kind of proceed in a very orderly fashion. He was an incredibly organized person and creator. And this is absolutely, Shelley, you're asking if this can be linked into a website that's built with a template. Absolutely. Airtable has tons of what are called APIs. So you can collect data in a Google form and have it spit right into an Airtable database. You can have the Airtable data set as the backbone for a social media account that, an Instagram account where, it shows a picture a day from your Airtable database. There's lots of really, really great ways to make use of the data that you've organized in this fashion. So from that very simple Excel spreadsheet that was just very high level and very, very basic, we went into this much more detailed and granular data collection for the item level part of the inventory. So we created a sequential object ID for every single item that we photographed. We would take a main or kind of hero image with a little whiteboard slate. We had a little magnetic whiteboard slate that we could stick to the wall, and we could put the object number, the date that we were taking pictures of it, and the initials of the people who were on the crew that day. So we knew, who was where, and if we needed to go back and say, like, do you guys remember doing that? Because I don't. Or like, did it have that, that stain on it when we did it? Do you remember? We also created a condition detail image. So documenting any kind of issues that, maybe tears or creases. In this case, we had adhesive from the multiple layers of the piece that was kind of visible and tacky, picking up, used a silicone adhesive that could sometimes pick up dirt. So that's something that would need to be cleaned or addressed in a conservation treatment. And if there was a signature on the piece, we would capture that as a detail image as well. So we could immediately, from this data, we can immediately find out how many pieces actually have a signature on them. That was a concern that Jay's wife had, was establishing authenticity. And so it's just a drag and drop interface. You can just plop those images right into that. You establish a field as being able to accept attachments. It can accept attachments of pretty much any format you like. So we documented the signature and took notes on any condition issues that we might identify, and just sort of a basic set of tags. So the tags were actually the last thing that we developed. Because for those, we needed to kind of get a sense of the collection as a whole before we could really define it and describe it with that what's the word I'm looking for? That degree of granularity, right? I had to, to kind of identify those types or styles or series, especially if things weren't titled or dated. We kind of needed to grok the whole collection before we could go in. So that was actually something I went back in and did afterwards. But we did the materials and the status, either finished, framed, signed, and of course, we can do a faceted location searching. So we can find everything that's in a box, anything that's located in the studio, anything that's located in the outbuilding. All of that information is trackable, and any kind of condition notes. So this way we could find, all right, here's the whole universe of the 2,000 odd pieces in this collection. And there did end up being over 2,100 pieces in this collection. It was a big project. We could figure out, single layer, multi-layer. We could kind of slice the collection in a lot of different ways with this data. And just like with Excel, Airtable has the ability to do calculations. So you can have running totals. You can use this for billing and for invoicing. So Shelley, your question about whether this can be used for licensing, absolutely. I really think the question is, what can't you use Airtable for, and not what can you use it for.
I found one or two limitations.
I have some
Yeah.
too. So yeah, yours
The
first.
limitation is so rare, so rare. Mine was doing a staffing schedule for a small organization. I could not. Maybe there's a way out there. I haven't cracked that one. It was a little unuser friendly. Snowden, I wonder if you put your Airtable back up for just a second. I want to ask you to do one thing just as a demonstration. And you know, the way that we've used it is we've set up the framework, the model for the Airtable and populated it with the data we had. But when we had researchers going into the field with their phones, they could just as easily add records because we had to send folks to a courthouse that had an archive and they had limited access. And so, but they were allowed to use their phones to take a quick photo, but the box that was that it was in, so that we can come back to it later if it was something we wanted to include in an exhibition for a loan request.
Yes,
made it super easy, and it was there and ready for everybody to review. We didn't have to handle it twice.
Exactly. That's a useful thing to note about Airtable. It lives on the internet. It is a live database. So anybody on your team can log in, and if they have permissions, they can edit the data. They can access it. You can update it live. One of the limitations I have found is that if somebody filters the data, then everybody sees the filtered view. So if you have multiple people working in it simultaneously, that can be a little hitch. It is also, if you
But you can create a different view.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Create a different view and then filter the data from there. That's and I can show you also one of the things that we needed to do quite a lot was to just browse things visually. So I created a gallery browse view where the basic information of title, date, number, and dimensions was in there, but the images were bigger than those teensy-weensy thumbnails, so that you can scroll down in the database and sort of browse things visually rather than through through the raw data, which can be a little overwhelming if you're not used to working with spreadsheets. What happens
some
when
of the other
goes down? That's great. Yes, it's a very good point that you do have to be able, you do have to have a live internet connection. You do have to be able to update it with an internet connection. So if you're working in a collection storage area, for instance, it's deep in a basement where there's no internet signal, Airtable is going to be tough for you to use. It won't update live. In that case, it's great to use, just capture the information in a flat file like Excel, and then use the really, really easy import features of Airtable to suck that into your data. Another thing I want to note about this basic information. Oh, hang on one second.
Let me just address that server going down. So I think that's a legitimate risk for institutions that use Airtable and depend on it. Is that it's owned by someone else. We don't have any control over that company. And so it's not the thing that you base your organization's existence on, because what if it gets bought? What if it gets shut down? What if it gets hacked? All of those things are possible. So while we are evangelists for the way that it helps us, there are risks to software. I mean, any software that lives on the internet has this risk, and it's something that you should be aware of. And what level of risk are you comfortable with? I would love to have another session about Airtable. I have so many things buzzing. Like I'd love to, there's views that you could create a form instantly to add data. You can. I was going to ask you to filter. I'm sorry, to group by date, so you can see how quickly you can group that you just can't do as easily in a flat a spreadsheet.
Yeah. I mean, we really could go on all day.
With our graphic designers so that they have access to the images and the text as it's approved, to create exhibition panels and with they don't need the high res image to be sent separately because they have access directly within that. Anyway,
Yes, and Shelley, you make a really great point. As with any kind of proprietary software, like putting your data in the hands of a company that could go out of business is scary. One of the questions I always have when I work with a product is, if I'm putting data in, how do I get it out? So that amongst the other considerations here are, Airtable does charge more based on how many people use are using your any given database. So that is a thing to consider. Pro tip, quick way around that is, if you generally trust all the people who are going to be working on it, just create a single login and have everybody use the same login. But don't tell anybody. You may still, as we did for this project, you may still need to go to a higher level plan if you're going to be storing a lot of data there, if you're going to store a lot of images. That said, I really don't know a more cost-effective way, even with those price points. I really don't know a more cost-effective way to achieve what Airtable lets us do. And given that you can pull the data out into tables very easily, you can rebuild that data in another environment as necessary. They do make it very easy to export data. And obviously you want to keep things like your master image files and your master documents together. But among the many things that I use Airtable for is, I have a job hunting database where I put all my resumes and copies of things. Security is also an issue. If you have proprietary information or information that you don't want the general public to see, Airtable is by default. You have to log in to see it. You can only decide who gets to see your data, and you can put some good constraints on that. But as somebody once said, like, any system can be hacked. So if there is sensitive information, this may not be the right answer. If you are dealing with like personal information or stuff that's constrained. It's also not very accessible for blind and low vision users. They have not been great about accessibility programming and making Airtable usable for blind and low vision users. So if you are a government institution and you really, really need to be compliant with accessibility requirements, that is something to bear in mind. Maybe not use Airtable directly, but pass that data through someplace that is going to be a little bit more accessible. That's a concern we should always have and be mindful of. That said, one of the things I was thinking about is, how might somebody else down the road need to use this information? And for this database, I made sure that we laid it out as compatible as possible with the VRA core tag set. So I wanted to make sure that if this was data that we would maybe be handing off to a museum at some point, that it would be in a format or use fields that could be mapped to standard forms of data that were used in the fields that we were, the community of practice that we were likely to be working with. So, and that's included in the information tags at the start of each of the columns. Is if it maps to a particular VRA core tag, we made sure that we made a note of that. So that, yeah, we were thinking about sort of structured data and cataloging and making things as cross-compatible as possible.
I'd love to hear from the group a little bit again.
And let me just run down this list, because I think it's important, again, to emphasize how valuable it is, even if you're not getting all of your information at once when you're assessing a collection. It does give you an early win, right? And especially for me as a consultant, working with a new client, this helps me assess the collection like really holistically, so that I get a sense of the collection as a whole, which when you are making strategic decisions for a collection, Andrew talked about that 80-20 distribution, where you have like most of your stuff is one kind of stuff and the rest of it is another kind of stuff, or multiple kinds of stuff. It gives you sort of that bird's eye view where you can see like the things that are sticking up, you know, the outliers and the weird things, but it also gives you a sense of like what most of the collection is. So you can start to generalize. It helps you summarize, and you can provide right off the bat. I said, you know, I could say, well, just looking at these totals from this rough count, just going through every drawer, every cabinet, every rolled up piece, we have approximately 2,000 pieces. So, you know, to confirm, you know, I had like guesstimated that just, you know, walking around without even having opened any drawers up. I'd said like, oh, there must be a couple thousand pieces here. So I was like, oh, look at that. Like, you know, I'm correct. If I had found a lot more, that would have been a really, really useful piece of information to have, that like, you know, oh, my instincts are actually like way off. You have like a lot more pieces and most of them are really, really tiny. It could help identify any urgent needs. So if there had been a major leak and water damage in a big chunk of the collection, or if there was evidence of pest infestation, I would have said like, okay, first thing we got to do is clear out the storage area, you know, get a handle on this centipede problem, you know, like deal with the spider nests. Any kind of urgent needs would be highlighted there, and we would be able to deal with those things in a timely fashion. In this case, speaking of timely,
everything you're talking about right now, I think about it as like, these are communication tools. It's telling you what helping you to understand priorities and to arrange what's urgent and what you have time for and what, you know, might never be rehoused or handled, and really to raise the cream to the top. But also to, if you have other people that you report to, most of us do, and maybe some of us are like self-managed, but if you need to communicate priorities, communicate scale, communicate timelines, this is all a tool to help you get there, because not everybody is going to be looking and thinking about the object and the group of objects, but seeing that in more of a black and white and being able to apply numbers and and dates and durations, staffing, I think will go a long way to building your case.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're doing it from an informed perspective too. Like, oh, I can tell already I'm going to need at least 2 people to help me out, you know, to handle these bigger pieces while I do the data entry. And yeah, it's as you say, it's a communication tool. Like a first pass is a way that the collection starts speaking to you so that you can start speaking to its needs to somebody else. It helps to, and as you say, manage expectations, to say like, hey, you know, it took me 2 days just to do this first pass, but I'm not going to be able to do the rest of this in 2 days. I did, you know, jot down the notes for, you know, for one single piece, and I can kind of estimate with 2,000 pieces, it's going to take us about 30 minutes per item to do that. That was also something that I monitored throughout the working process. When we got to the item level inventory, is I just had a starting number and an ending number at the end of the day, so I could see how many pieces we had inventoried, and I could factor that out because I was using Excel and some, you know, very, very simple formulas. I could track how much they were spending per piece to inventory. And so it's like, here's what I get paid per hour. Here's what my assistants get paid per hour. Here's how many pieces we got through today. So today it costs $7 per piece of art to inventory this collection, because we were, you know, we had a really good day. Some days it might cost, you know, like the big cumbersome pieces might cost more, but it gives us a sense of the averages as well. In this case, because the artist had a limited time left in his life, it helped us to be able to ask really basic questions in a timely way, and sort of say like, which way is top and bottom? If you haven't signed a piece and it's abstract and there's no, you know, there's no notation or anything, like, how do we know which way is up for these pieces? And that's where digital documentation is really helpful. You can take a picture on a computer and then rotate it as needed if you find out later that it goes that way up instead of this way up. That same question you brought up earlier, is it vertical now or horizontal? Like we don't know. And as you say, estimating costs and timelines. So we could know, there's 78 little rolls in that closet. We got through 3 of them today. And we are, as of today, we are halfway through, so that we could have road signs and mileposts and be able to kind of have like a, little status bar for the entire project. It is also a great time to create that initial documentation and the sort of before version of what you're working with, which I think, Lisa said this in the chat earlier, that like take pictures, like caption them later, use them later, but just like take pictures of everything. That before and after can be really comforting when you're looking at a lot of work and managing a big collection. Imposing order out of chaos can be really, really satisfying, especially if you have visual proof that you've done it.
So I'll just run through a couple of slides, a little thought process, little thought exercise here, and just looking at those weird and those 80-20, the 20s here, project that I had worked on. And we'd love to hear maybe after the lunch break, what are your unusual, interesting things that we all might like to hear about? Maybe we'll let people try to identify what's in the picture on the left that is worth noting and may have some unique challenges to it. Anyone want to venture a guess? Stella, Rosebud, yes, Rosebud from Citizen Kane. Sled.
Who's Oscar?
Apparently it didn't burn. That was alone. So it had to take particular care there. And then as well as the Wicked Witch's hat. And I think Snowden, you even knew the name of the actress right off the bat.
Margaret.
Who wore it. And then another challenging storage and housing and preservation. Anyone know the movie reference here?
I don't know, but it's a literal nightmare. This is so terrifying.
Oh yeah, this is
this Dark Crystal.
Dark Crystal. Yes, the Skeksis.
Yeah, the whole movie's terrifying.
That movie, that movie is not for children. I saw it when I was a child, and I really wish I hadn't. That movie was scary as hell.
All right, I'll take it away. Sorry to traumatize anyone. Bring back haunting memories. So yeah, we'd love to hear, perhaps after the break, what challenges do you have that maybe we could chat a little bit about and see if there's anything we can brainstorm.
Andrew, I have a question. When you say what is our 20% items, are you talking about ones that are difficult or fragile, or
the things where you're going to spend most of your time, right? The things that are not easy to manage and move and store, but think about moving a household. The clothes, the books, the dishes are a piece of cake. Wait till you get to the artwork, the table lamps, the
junk drawer.
The junk drawer. Like, where are you going to spend all your time, and is going to define success.
Mm-hmm. Your condiments. My friends just moved, and they're like, we have like $200 worth of fancy relish and mustard. Like, we're not gonna like give that up. They're like, we're just gonna take it in a cooler with us when we drive cross country. Needs, but they may be the thing that's really, really key, like the thing that everybody wants to see when they come to visit your collection, or that you bring out and show to every school tour. Super. It's the 20%. It depends on how you look at it.
We were talking about unusual challenges, the outliers,